Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 61st ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Pittsburgh Steelers reporter Nick Farabaugh. Nick, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matthew. I appreciate the invite.
Absolutely, I really appreciate you coming on. And getting right into it, I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
Yeah, man, it probably happened way back in middle school. My dad kind of had thought about going into sports broadcasting. I'm talking about, even way back in the day, he like moved all the way to like Las Vegas to think about it. Didn't work out due to some personal circumstances. And,
Mhm.
obviously he was the guy that kind of instilled the love of sports in me. Growing up in a town like Pittsburgh, it's kind of hard not to embrace the sports culture that's
Yeah,
there. You got the Steelers, you got the Penguins at the time
yeah.
when I was growing up, winning cups with Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. Pirates, we won't mention them, but you do have a lot of sports success surrounding that, and so he kind of brought it up in like seventh or eighth grade and was like, this could be a thing because I'd never been too shy about got to be on camera and doing those
Mhm.
things. And I had done some, media stuff with the little stuff we had already. So that was something that kind of crept into my mind. That when I got into high school, I did, I wrote for the paper. I did some, TV things and
Yeah.
whatever I could do. And then in college, I kind of took that to heart and kind of really dove into it head first. Basically, attacked every side of sports media I could to see what I wanted to do, and that's kind of how I ended up in sports media. I didn't know that I was going to end up, beat writing or writing. I tried to go into every different direction,
Mhm.
see what I kind of want to put my foot into in this industry, and that's kind of where I am. So I have a long, winding journey there, but I kind of knew what by the time I was 13, 14, this is kind of what I wanted to do.
Mhm. Yeah, and of course, you attended college at the University of Pittsburgh. You've previously written for both Steelers Depot and Behind the Steel Curtain. You were also a beat writer for Pittsburgh Sports Now from 2020 to 2024 before eventually joining Penn Live. How would you describe the journey you've taken to get to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I started, I was kind of a self-starter when I was like 16. I decided one day to write a mock draft on the Behind the Steel Curtain fan posts. That's kind of how I started. And it was, I remember I started then a little blog. Like I'd written, I think my first two things I ever wrote were a 2017 mock draft for the Steelers and then a Lamar Jackson scouting report. And if you dig deep enough, you could find both of those. They're still out there. But that's kind of what it was a self starter journey there. And I was kind of gaining experience, and kind of high school, that was more about just kind of getting the basic foundations
Mhm.
laid and kind of learning things. But when I got to college, I mean, you want to talk about what I did at college. I did a lot of things around the pit programs, obviously,
Yeah.
because I worked there. I literally worked for the University of Pittsburgh for a little bit. I was in the broadcasting side of it. I would call games for their student radio station. I would work for ACC Network a little bit. I would do some behind the scenes broadcasting. I called some games on TV. I wrote, for the Pitt News on top of that. I did all these things, right? And then, covered the Steelers, covered high school football, covered Pitt football. And in my sophomore year, I got, to be able to dabble into Steelers games. I was really only there for games and one practice a week, but that kind of gave me the foundational pieces to
Mhm.
go where I've gone. And so my thing for everybody there is just start early, do what you can do because hey, I self started. I didn't know where that was going to take me.
Mhm.
Turns out those two fan posts ended up leading me kind of here. And I also would say if you don't know necessarily, if you don't know, do you want to be a sports writer? Do you want to be a broadcast? What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Just do everything. I
Mhm.
did it in college, so I loved it. I loved learning all the different sides of sports. It's actually helped me so much. I've learned the business side of it. I've learned the public relations side of it. I've done it all. So it's a lot of fun getting to learn sports. But that's kind of how my journey is. It's multifaceted. I started it early, and
Mhm.
now I'm here.
Yeah, I love to hear that. And getting into some Steelers talk, they obviously have the 21st overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. And the current quarterback room consists of Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson. That's obviously not how it's going to look at the start of the season. The Saints have recently been rumored to potentially target Aaron Rodgers as well after the Derek Carr injury? I know it seems like the Steelers were the main favorites. Now New Orleans is kind of in that conversation as well. Would you like to see Pittsburgh go after a quarterback with the 21st pick now that we know that getting Aaron Rodgers isn't necessarily a guarantee?
I wouldn't, and here's the reason why. I mean, the Steelers did this 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Bad down class. They took a swing at Kenny Pickett, and it didn't work out, and it set their franchise back. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
they're in this kind of cycle of quarterback questions that we
Mhm.
have every offseason. I mean, I did this last year. I didn't do the wait till the draft, see what Aaron Rodgers did, but Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, the year before it, you had Kenny Pickett. Would he be that? The year before that, you brought in Mitch Trubisky. I mean, there's a lot of questions since Ben Roethlisberger retired in 2021. The Steelers really haven't been able to fix that. And a big part of that is they've kind of panicked at quarterback situations, or they haven't invested a ton into it. But they need to kind of have long term thinking here in some regards. I mean, maybe if Shadur Sanders fell, I guess that would be the one
Mhm.
that you would think about. But Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck, Jalen Milrow. I mean, those guys aren't really guys to me that are going to needle move for them in the long term as franchise guys. Right now, if you get them in day two, that's a little bit of a different story. But I think at 21 overall, they need to strengthen this roster. It's getting older, right? You got Cam Hayward, who's 36 years old. You need to make sure that defense is replenished. You need to make
Mhm.
sure that D line gets replenished. You can add a receiver because of the questions about George Pickens' future. You could look a lot of different directions on this roster, to be quite honest. You could cornerback, you could go running back, you could go way off the kind of scale and look at safety, even if you wanted to. There's a lot of different areas they could improve. And so I just think they need to build this roster up, continue to do it. And then next year, the 2026 quarterback class, from kind of what I've heard from scouts, they like it. They think it's going to be pretty solid. So the Steelers should have more options next year. I don't think it's going to be a 2024 quarterback class where you have those six go in the top
Yeah.
12, which was just bananas, right? I don't think it's going to be quite like that, but I think it's going to be better than 25 and 22. So that I think is going to be the year where the Steelers can maybe go up and get somebody, and they have four compensatory picks that they'll have at their disposal to maybe move up the board
Mhm.
and land a quarterback. So I think they got to kind of look at the long term here and go to the 26 class, ignore it this year, maybe draft a mid round quarterback, but don't panic.
Now, you mentioned some of the positions that the Steelers could potentially target with the 21st overall pick if they don't take a quarterback, wide receiver, defensive line, cornerback, just to name a few. Are there any specific players you've been eyeing at that pick that, help fill the gap at some of those positions that you mentioned?
Yeah, there are. When I look at defensive line, I think the Steelers could use one of two things. It could either be Cam Hayward's replacement
Mhm.
to kind of have him mentor him, or it could be a big nose tackle that can give him instant run defense with some pass rush upside. So the two guys to me that check that box are Eric Harmon from Oregon and Kenneth Grant from Michigan. I think those two guys make a lot
Yeah.
of sense for them. Harmon's kind
Mhm.
of the more the Hayward replacement. Grant's that big nose tackle, but can play three tech. Reminds me a lot of DJ Reader when you watch him. He's got that big frame,
Yeah.
got a lot of power,
Mhm.
instant run defense boost, but developing in that pass rush. And then Harmon's kind of the opposite. But they're both really good players. At wide receiver, the Steelers are kind of in a weird spot because they made the big DK Metcalf trade, of course.
Yeah.
George Pickens is going to stick around as long as it pertains to that. I don't think they're going to trade him on draft day or anything. So they have two outside receivers. Could they use a slot? Maybe. But George Pickens passed this year, not under contract. So
Mhm.
that's a bigger one. So I think, someone like Matthew Golden or Meke Bukum could make a lot of sense for them. Guys that can play outside or inside. And then you look at corner. The Steelers love these big, kind of lengthy corners. You look at Joey Porter Jr. Obviously, he's a big press corner with 34-inch arms. Corey Trice, very much in the same way. If they wanted a cornerback that can get mentored by Darius
Mhm.
Slay and kind of take cues from him, I look at someone like Jade Barron. I really like him because he could start in the slot year one, and then you can kick him out
Yeah.
over across from Joey Porter Jr. Because across from Joey, they've kind of liked. They haven't liked these kind of bigger press corners. They kind of like these smaller guys that can do a little bit
Yeah.
of everything. And Barron can do that. So those are some guys that really stick out to me as players that I would look into for the Steelers. Now they'll have other options too. They've shown a lot of
Mhm.
interest in safeties. Minka Fitzpatrick, his coming off probably his worst year as a pro. His contract next year could be a potential cap cut. Sean Elliott's going to be a free agent next year. So Nick Imanwari as well out of South
Mhm.
Carolina is an interesting player to watch. Obviously, that great combine he had, great athlete. So he's another player to watch. But I think you look at those kind of five players as the
Mhm.
top five, I would say, for the Steelers.
And if Pittsburgh does end up targeting Aaron Rodgers kind of as that 1-year bridge quarterback until the strong 2026 class, as you mentioned, how might that impact this team both on the field as well as off the field and any locker room impact that that might have?
Yeah, I think that's the big question because we
Mhm.
know Rodgers kind of is this polarizing figure, not just in the public, but sometimes in the locker room. Like, look at the Jets. You see a lot of guys coming out and praising him. Like, I saw Jamie Sherwood come out last week and say he was great. He set the standard. And then obviously Garrett Wilson had basically what is a pretty public ire towards him at this point. It was so much so he was going to request to get traded if Rodgers came back. So there are some players that he really meshes well with, others he doesn't. We've seen him be able to mentor guys in the past, though. So, say if the Steelers did take
Yeah.
Shadur Sanders at 21, I don't think that's going to be an issue. Jordan Love literally did learn from him. I think on the field, it's an odd fit. He doesn't really do what Arthur Smith likes. He's going to play
Mhm.
a lot of shotgun 11 personnel. You know Arthur Smith, it's a lot under center 12, multiple tight ends, play action, and Aaron Rodgers at this stage with his lack of mobility kind of just takes the shotgun snaps, processes because he's such a great processor. Obviously, he's 41. He's done this, and there's still magical throws in that arm. That arm is not gone. He still has that. And so I do think there's upside to Aaron Rodgers' signing with the Steelers. It could get explosive in the locker room. There's three really strong personalities there between Rodgers, Metcalf, and Pickens. That is a really three-headed
Mhm.
group that is very talented, but also very much strongly opinionated about what others should do in the system. That can either turn to great leadership and accountability, or that could turn to explosiveness. We'll
Mhm.
see kind of how that would work out. So I think there's risks to it, but I also think if Rodgers ends up, find a little bit of magic, because the Steelers did find a little magic in Russ last year. I think that was something they did find at least before, obviously, the 5-game losing streak. If you could find a little Rodgers magic in there, I mean, the
Mhm.
Steelers can crack this playoff streak they've had. They haven't won a playoff game in 8 years. That's
Yeah.
something that they obviously
Mhm.
want to end. And I think at his best, Rodgers raises this team's ceiling at least to potentially win one of those playoff games. They're not a Super Bowl contender, but I think they are a contender to knock off one of these teams in the AFC at least, and that is a step in the right direction for Pittsburgh.
Mhm. Now everyone's focusing on what they could do with the 21st overall pick. That said, are there any specific players that you would really like to see them target? Maybe day two, maybe day three, around that range, a sleeper player that is really high on your list?
Yeah, there are a few guys that I
Mhm.
look at. In terms of day three guys, I look at if they don't go with the first round at defensive line. I really like Oregon's Jamari Caldwell. I think if
Mhm. Yeah.
they need a nose tackle, we saw what happened to them in Baltimore last year and their
Mhm.
season. Derrick Henry kind of trumped them. The Steelers need to be able to defend the run a little better, and so Caldwell could do that. You have a bunch of other guys in there that can do that. Alfred Collins, I think, is a really good run defender in this class. There are a lot of guys the Steelers look at and can kind of get in there and immediately upgrade their run defense. So if they don't have a guy that they want to be the Cam Hayward replacement or spend that first round pick on, I think a guy that's a nose tackle and brings instantaneous run
Mhm.
defense is a big thing for them. So that's kind of something I would look at. Receiver, I feel like is probably going to be a later. I don't feel
Mhm.
like it's going to be the first round draft pick.
Yeah.
I think they're going to go in the middle rounds, but I think you need to look at guys with the right skill set as well to
Mhm.
complement DK Metcalf and Kyle Williams out of Washington State fits that bill to me. I think they need a separator,
Yeah.
a route runner type. It's what he is. I really like him. He's kind of shot up the board recently. I think he'll probably be landing in the top 100. Running back's going to be the big one. I mean, the Steelers do need a running back. It's not dire because Jalen Warren is really good. They still
Yeah.
have Kenneth
Mhm.
Gainwell, who they signed, who they really like. But they can use one. Jalen Warren's not under contract past this year. Kenneth Gainwell's a 1-year deal. So they could use a running back for this committee, even if they sign Jalen Warren long term, which is a possibility. I look at it and say, man, there's so many options. They love speed, it seems, in this group, but guys like Bashal Tutin, Guys like Jadon Blue, I think, are interesting. Fumble issues, though, so if you're a little risk adverse, I understand that. If you want to go for a workhorse type back, I think DJ Giddens out of Kansas State is a really fun player. He can do a little bit of everything for you. So the Steelers can look at that running back class and really like it. And then quarterback, obviously, if they don't take one in the first round, they probably will take one at some point in this class. And you kind of look at who's good in round 3. If he fell there, I would be really interested in Milrow. I don't think he's going to fall that far necessarily, but I think Milrow, with the tools he has, with the upside he can
Yeah.
bring, he's a ceiling shot rather than a floor shot, which is what I think you need in the AFC, considering you have Lamar, Allen, Burrow, Mahomes, all these talented players at quarterback. I would like him at 83. I think he's a calculated risk. I think there's positive signs to his game as well that kind of showcase he could reach a ceiling. So I wouldn't hate that either.
Yeah, and getting into some free agency, just over a month ago, Pittsburgh signed cornerback Darius Slay Jr. to a 1-year, $10 million contract. Slay is obviously a 6-time Pro Bowler, spent time with the Eagles, spent time with the Lions. Does it concern you that he's already 34 years old, coming off the first season of his career with 0 interceptions besides his rookie campaign?
Yeah, I mean, it does worry me a little bit.
Mhm.
Listen, he was really good last year. I don't think there's any denying how good Darius Slay was in 2024. But the Steelers have done this in the past, really since 2021, where they've kind of patched in that corner 2 spot.
Yeah.
Steven Nelson was here for about 3 years. And since then, the Steelers have kind of thrown in, Patrick Peterson, Levi Wallace. We've seen Dante Jackson, and now it's Darius Slay. Slay's a better player than all those guys at this point in his career. And so it's going to be hard for him not to be an upgrade over those players. But you also want multi-year solutions. I think the Steelers kind of missed an opportunity this year. We saw guys like Charvarius Ward, DJ Reed, Paulson Adebo, so many more that were able to kind of get these long-term deals in free agency. And they were able to get long-term solutions. So what I think the Steelers could have done was sign one of those guys. They had the cap space. And they could have had their corner duo for years, Joey Porter Jr. plus that guy. I
Yeah.
think that would have been really good for them on this defense because they're going to go through a lot of change up front in the next few years. But I think they could get some stability on the back end, which is, I think, important for them. Slade, though, I think is going to be a good player. He's going to be a great mentor to Joey Porter Jr. and whatever young corner they bring in. I think that's going to be a big-time boost for them. I also think he's just going to be a better player. He'll give them ball skills, so he'll give them potential interceptions. The Steelers love to create turnovers, love to create havoc. Big thing for them defensively. So I think he'll be a fine signing. And so my concern with him isn't necessarily him, just falling off a cliff and not being good. I think it's going to be really hard for Darius Slay not to be better than all those names I mentioned. It's more about you had an opportunity to maybe get multi-years on this player and get a solution long-term and take that off your board for a little bit. But the Steelers didn't do that. So next year, when we're talking this at this time again, we're going to be talking about corner. And I think that's going to be something that the Steelers next year, they're going to have so many needs, and it's just one other thing they're going to have to fix.
Yeah, and Slay was definitely one of the bigger free agent signings that they made, if not the biggest. They obviously traded for DK Metcalf, but getting into some smaller free agent signings, guys like Brandon Eccles, Malik Harrison, Scotty Miller, Kenneth Gainwell. Are there any under the radar free agent signings? Maybe it's a player that I just named that you think could make a big impact for Pittsburgh in 2025?
Yeah, there are 2 of them. One of them he didn't name, Daniel Ekuale, who's a
Yeah,
defensive lineman from the Patriots. He's not going to be a starter for them, but he started 16 games for the Patriots last year. He's a really, really good rotational run defender. I talked about that run defense, what they needed. They needed to boost their run defense. I think he fits perfectly into that mantra. And he can play nose, 3 tech, 5 tech. That's great for the Steelers. They love having that versatility. He's not a complete nothing as a passer. I think that's all good. So they're building up that depth on the defensive line. So I like what he brings. And then I think, the other guy that you mentioned that I think could have an under the radar impact is Eccles. I really like
yeah,
Brandon
yeah.
Eccles. He can play inside or outside. He's an elite gunner, an elite special teamer right away. So he brings kind of 3 different things to the Steelers. He's outside corner depth in case Slay or Porter get hurt. He can play inside and start in the slot. If you want to do that, he'll compete with B.E. Bishop for that spot. And then he's going to bring instantaneous special teams. And I think that's an impressive thing in one player. That's maximizing what you can have in your secondary. And Eccles is a really solid player. You look at his tape from the Jets. Again, ball skills. Steelers love these guys that are able to go up and create havoc at the catch point. He's a really smart player. Tackling, a little bit of an issue, but he's a fun player, versatile. The Steelers can really look into it and use. So I think those two are guys that I look at that are maybe not super names to anybody, flashy names, but I do think that they are going to be impactful for Pittsburgh.
And a lot of the major free agents at this point, they've received new contracts. However, there's still a few guys looming in free agency. Your Rasul Douglases, Amari Coopers, Asante Samuel, Julian Blackman. Are there any free agents that are still available that Pittsburgh could potentially target to add some extra depth before the start of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the Steelers could use help at slot corner. I do
Mhm,
think Eccles has only played about 150 snaps in his career. Being Bishop is kind of a roller coaster. And so I look at someone like Hilton or Samuel, and the Steelers only have so much draft capital. So it's possible slot corner gets kind of tabled just for something else.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I think one of those slot corners makes a lot of sense for them. I think Hilton in particular could be a really good rundown guy, and then you can complement that with Eccles on late downs or Bishop, whichever one plays better. So I think the slot is an interesting place for the Steelers defensively to maybe add to. And then, I really I do look at running back. Again, something's going to probably get tabled in this class. If it's
Yeah.
running back, I know it's a really deep running back class, but if it does get tabled, you still have a lot of players out there. J.K. Dobbins is
Mhm,
still a free agent, Nick Chubb. So there are options for the Steelers. If they want a running back too,
mhm.
I think there will be options for them there. But those are kind of the two spots that immediately stick out to me as potential additions for the Steelers after the draft. I think slot corner is probably the biggest one to watch, though, outside of that.
Yeah, and recently Pittsburgh also made various changes to their coaching staff, hiring Gerald Alexander as their new defensive backs coach and Scott McCurley as their new inside linebackers coach. Are there any changes that you would expect to happen this upcoming season with these guys at the helm?
A lot of more communication emphasis.
Mhm.
If you watch the Steelers down the stretch in that 5 game losing streak, their
Yeah.
defense fell apart because they couldn't
Mhm.
communicate. Coverage busts on basic coverages, on basic routes, basic motions, things defenses should be able to do in week 17, 18, even to the wild card
Mhm.
round. It was just JV stuff, as Mike Tomlin would like to say. And so I think that's a big part of the coaching changes.
Mhm.
Alexander is kind of known as this kind of field general type that really drills communication. They've had experience with Jared Alexander. He was their assistant defensive backs coach before leaving to go to Las Vegas last year as the safeties coach there. He's known as a guy that really drills communication, is able to really get deep into that bag. So that'll be a big part of it. I don't think they're going to change philosophically a ton. They're going to want those turnovers. They're going to want ball production, but I do think the communication aspects and at linebacker on top of that, McCurley's a veteran. He's been around. Same thing.
Mhm. Yeah, and Alexander obviously played in the NFL as well. I think for
Here, one
5
sec.
or mhm.
Sorry, folks. Allergies happen, so I sneezed and just got tissue. My apologies.
You're all good. But as I was saying, Alexander did play in the NFL as well. So getting into that communication side of things, he definitely brings that aspect to the table. And you talked about Mike Tomlin a little bit. He's never had a losing record during his 18 years as Pittsburgh's head coach. That said, what does Tomlin's future look like with the Steelers, especially if they have a poor season this year, considering that they haven't won a playoff game in over 8 years? I think it was January of 2017, their last playoff victory.
Yeah, I mean that's really tough, right? When you look at the dichotomy between the big time wins he's had and then the losses in the playoffs. I mean, he's approaching record straight playoff losses. I think Marvin Lewis is the only one that has more right now. That's not great for Pittsburgh. They are a team that is esteemed on success, not just in the regular season but the postseason. And when you keep having the same type of losses, it's not like the Steelers are close either, right? They've been blown out basically in all these
Mhm.
losses. Or you have disappointing losses to the Browns in 2020 and the Jaguars in 2017, where you feel like you were the better team. So there are multiple different ways to look at. So it's got to change at some point. The Steelers rosters haven't been great. Mike Tomlin also has a huge hand in building those rosters, so he's not blameless in that. A lot of people will kind of throw at you, well, the Steelers aren't giving him much, but Mike Tomlin's been here for 17, 18 years now. He has a ton of pull in that organization. He has a ton of personnel pull, so he's very involved in the team building process, and so he's at fault for that. And there are a lot of concerning coaching trends you look at with Mike T that are
Mhm.
kind of showing up a lack of detail from week to week. I talked about the communication with the staff. Well, that shouldn't be happening anyways in week 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
They're just basic things, a lot of penalties, a lot of sloppiness on the field. The offensive hires have not been great, right? You look at Matt Canada, Randy Fiedner, obviously those are misses. Arthur Smith, fine hire, but first year didn't go swimmingly there either. You've heard about that connection between him and Russell Wilson just fell apart down the stretch on top of that. And so I think there's a lot of things to look at for Mike Tomlin, but at some point, he's very safe right now. It's not like he's on the
Mhm.
hot seat and he's going to be fired if they don't win a playoff game this year. But I do think at some point that's going to have to change. His contract runs out in 2027. So he's still got 3 more years on that contract. But if he doesn't win a playoff game in that stretch, I think it becomes a little harder to see him getting that next extension with Pittsburgh. As crazy as that sounds,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
do think it's coming up at some point soon.
And, you obviously hear about the guys like TJ Watt or George Pickens, but is there any underrated or underappreciated players that could really have a breakout year this season, make a big push that you might not expect?
Yeah, I mean, I look around this roster, and I think Keanu Benton's probably the biggest one.
Mhm.
I thought it was coming last year, but he kind of got played out of position and a necessity. He was playing a lot of nose tackle. Probably needs to play more out where Larry Ogunjobi was at that 3 tech, 5 tech spot. He'll take over the sub package rushing situations as well this year, which will be big for him. He's a really good pass rusher. Just needs to learn how to finish a little bit more, man. He's so talented.
Mhm.
They just need to get him to be able to finish. He was so close last year. If you look at his tape, he is basically
Mhm.
nearly at the quarterback about 20 times. You're like, just finish. He could have had, 8, 9 sacks, and it would have been a monster year. I think he's got a chance to have a really big year. And then the other guy I kind of look at that maybe a lot of people don't look at, but I do because of his injuries, and now he's back. Troy Faltanu, their first round pick from 2024. They need him to be a big time piece on that offensive line. They saw that with Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick in their rookie years. It looked like they're good. It looks like they're going to be legitimate big time contributors for the Pittsburgh Steelers going forward. If Faltanu does it, that means 3 for 3 on the offensive line in the draft. That's going to be a big thing that they need. I think Faltanu has the chance to be that.
Mhm. Yeah, now the Steelers obviously finished last year with a 10-7 record, second in the AFC North, and they ended up losing in the wild card round against the Ravens, who were first in the AFC North. This is very broad, and a lot can change until the start of the season. But what are some realistic expectations we can set for this team this upcoming year?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you can kind of look at is I think the defense is probably going to be a little better. I think they added some necessary
Mhm.
new blood there. When you look at Slay, I think they still retain a lot of talent. The defensive line, I think, is going to be better with
Mhm.
Ekuwale, a draft pick. So they'll be better there. The new coaching changes. They'll probably get some schematic changes. It all works up to be a better unit. The offense, I think, is going to be the big question. Now, they have more
Yeah.
talent than they did because Faltanu's going to be back. Obviously, Metcalf, huge addition to this group. They did lose Najee Harris, but I don't think it's going to be a huge kind of negative for them. I think he kind of took away from some of their efficiency. I think more Jalen Warren's going to be good for them, and the draft pick hopefully gives them a little explosiveness. So I think there's positives here. I think the quarterback situation obviously is dragging on some of these players. I don't think it's drastically different from last year. They've gotten to 10-7 or 9-8 in vastly different ways, no matter how bad that quarterback room has been. So what I think you can expect from them is probably again a very similar season, 10-7, 11-6, 9-8, somewhere in that pocket probably. And probably a first round playoff loss. It
Mhm.
feels very much like it'll be the same as it's been over the last few years. So that's what I would expect for the Steelers. You probably will get some drama, as we mentioned, strong personalities. If Rodgers comes in between him, Metcalf, and Pickens, probably going to have weekly stories about that somehow. So the Pittsburgh Steelers will be entertaining. There's going to be no doubt about it. But I think ultimately they probably end up in the same situation the Steelers have been really for the last half decade, and that's an issue.
And throughout your time covering the Steelers, would you say there's been a specific player that you would consider to be the funniest or most memorable player that you've ever gotten the opportunity to cover?
Yeah, I'd say linebacker Landon Roberts is probably that
Mhm,
answer. Super Bowl champion, playing on those Patriots teams. He's
mhm,
awesome. He's a guy that kind of wants to keep it real, 100% unfiltered. Doesn't matter if it's on camera, off camera. But he's a guy that I have immense respect for because of that. He's all honesty. He's a guy that's very entertaining. He's funny. His locker room loves him. Him and Patrick Queen are locker mates. They are right next to each other. That duo is probably the most memorable duo I've covered. They are very similar to each other. Patrick
mhm.
Queen's the same way, where he's got this unfiltered raw truth, funny, goofy guy. And then when you look at them on the field, they just turn into absolute demons like that. They
Yeah.
have like alter egos. Patrick Queen is Patrick in the locker room, but he's PQ on the field. Landon Roberts is
Mhm,
Landon in the locker room, but he's E-Rob on the field. They
mhm,
make that joke many times that they have alter egos on the field because when they get on the field, things happen. I remember the first time, Landon Roberts, it was, I think, the first padded day of practice in 2023 at training camp. There was a running back that came in, just got signed because they had a few injuries. His name was John Lovett. You may know him. He played at Penn State, Baylor, had a few stops around the NFL. They were doing backs on backers, which is just a pass pro drill. Let's see what you can do against linebackers. And Lovett steps up, gets forklifted and driven into the ground by Roberts. Concussion, uh, out for about 10 days, gets cut, never seen again. And that's Atlanta Roberts. But then they joke
yeah,
about it in the locker room about 2 months later, and they said that wasn't a Landon Roberts, that was E-Rob, and
mhm,
that's a Landon Roberts, man. He's that type of player. If you want real honest truth, he's going to give it to you. But he's also a really good player. He's the culture builder. So he was my favorite player to cover probably so far in my career. But there's many great ones that I could name. I love covering Patrick Peterson. That was really cool. Obviously, I watched him growing up, but just you understand why he was as great as he was when you're around him like that. Currently, right now, Cam Hayward's a joy to cover.
mhm,
He's just you understand why he's great. And then I think the other one, that was really fun to cover. Didn't have a great year when he was with Pittsburgh, but I remember Allen Robinson was really good to
mhm.
cover.
Yeah.
Really smart player. You understand, great person on top of that. Probably the purest person maybe I've ever met in the Steelers locker room was him. And so there are a lot of great guys that I've covered, but those are just a few names I wanted to throw out there.
Now, I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things up. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster or journalist like me, what would it be?
Do everything. That's what I would say. Do everything and have that self-starting ability. You can write, do podcasting, do some radio stuff, do some broadcasting work behind the scenes, understand everything, social media,
Mhm,
do it more and more and more because nowadays, folks, for my job right now, I write, I podcast, I use my camera, I do social
mhm,
media. Guys, I do like four
yeah,
or five jobs in one. It's
mhm,
the
yeah,
new beat writer age, right? So the future is going to be that. You got to condense it into one. It doesn't matter if you're going to be working, at a smaller outlet that's local for high school sports, or if you're going to be working at ESPN. All of that's going to condense itself into something. So if you want to be a broadcaster, a writer, whatever, that's going to be a big need for you.
mhm,
And hey, if you don't want to do that and you want to end up going, into the behind the scenes for sports broadcasting, you want to be a producer or something, I've done that. It's great. You have that experience then, right? So it gives you multiple avenues. Sports is a volatile business. I think that's the big thing I always want to
mhm,
talk with young people about because I'm young and it's volatile, and I haven't experienced that volatility yet myself personally, but I've seen it happen to so many people around me that are my friends, that are my colleagues. So make sure you have as much in the bag because it makes you one, it makes you indispensable. But two, it also allows you to have options, right? It allows you to have job options. So that's a big thing. So do everything you
mhm,
possibly can, especially when you're in college. I think that's the learning experience. Get mentors, network, And that's the biggest thing too. Network, 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 network. Just be relentless at. Doesn't matter. You should have everybody you possibly can under your umbrella. And so I think that's a big thing. There's just a lot of hard work that goes into it. But when you're young and you're in college, really do as much as you can to learn about it, because I think, when you were like me, for example, I didn't know which aisle I was going to go down. I knew I was going to work in sports, but I didn't know which aisle I was going to go down. Sometimes you find something you really love and you're able to kind of go full speed towards that. And I think that's really important to also find. So find yourself in sports, but do as much as you can. Tell them you can do as much as you can. Learn as much as you can. I think that's the key.
I really appreciate that advice, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up? Where can they find some of your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Farabaugh read the stuff over at PennLive.com. There's so much stuff coming for the NFL draft. And then as well, make sure to follow the YouTube page, Steelers Blitz on Penn Live, because I have a podcast there every week. So if you want to watch Steelers, I'm over there.
Yeah, again, big thanks to Nick Farabaugh for being the 61st ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.